an MRI brain, so as you all know, the first, when it comes to routine brain plane planning, you will plan axial sections, parallel to a line, imaginary line joining the genu and splenia of the corpus callosum. And you plan sagittal sections parallel to the interhemispheric fissure. Fine, this everybody is aware. Right? So in brain, most of the times it is like this, whatever the pathology. Even if it's a pituitary, you will still do your axials and sagittals in this fashion. But suppose a patient is very uncooperative, you still have to give some images for the patient's ultimate management. In such cases, if your system supports, you have this motion correction softwares available like Propeller or Blade sequences, please go for it and please go for fast sequences. It still gives the same kind of information, right? You need to justify the study, you need to give some sort of detail for the consultant, right? And only sort of an oblique planning will be required in hippocampal imaging. Suppose you're doing an epileptic patient or a seizure protocol, you will have to focus on the hippocampus. So this is the hippocampus on all three different planes, and you need to plan sections. Okay, so this is what it is. So in your sagittal, look at the long axis of the hippocampus. Okay, and the most important sequence will be your high resolution coronal T2 and a coronal 3D SPGR. Now, you need to plan sections perpendicular to the body of the hippocampus. Now, this information will be useful for beginners because who are yet to start practicing doing an MR, right? And you need to check in the other two planes also correspondingly. Now, if you look at this, you can see the hippocampus image. You can see this is the roof. This is the hippocampus. This is the amygdala, which forms the roof of the hippocampus. And you have certain landmarks like the basilar artery to the interpeduncular system. And you have, when you scroll through the images, you will be able to see the hippocampal tail at the level of the superior colliculus, right? So this is one modification when you're doing a brain protocol, particularly hippocampal imaging. What do you do after that? Right, you do a volumetric sequence, that is a T1 weighted point gradient sequence in the coronal plane. Ultimately, you need to transfer the images to a workstation and start tracing the hippocampus in the subsequent slices. And ultimately, when you submit, the volume will be displayed. So this information is important, particularly when they're looking for volume loss in a particular hippocampus. If a patient is throwing continuous seizures and they want to know if there is a volume loss, so mesial temporal sclerosis or whatever it is, you need to complete the post-processing and push it to PACS. Okay. The next protocol will be looking for the clinical applications of Fiesta. So you have this, the heavily T2 weighted Fiesta sequence. You call it as Fiesta or the true Phi sequence. So there are various applications for it, right? In the brain, you can do it for, cysternography, that is in a patient with CSF rhinorrhea. You need to perform it in the coronal plane and in the sagittal plane. And similarly, for cranial nerve imaging, for any CP angle tumors, and for all cranial nerves, you can do it. Then when you come to the abdomen, you can do it in enterography or enterochlesis, and it goes on like that. Okay, so you should know where all you need to do Fiesta. For example, in the brain, you have a patient with seizures and they have given contrast and you're seeing ring-enhancing lesions. Okay, and the consultant wants to differentiate between a tuberculoma or a neurocystic sarcosis. So if you do a Fiesta, you will be able to show the scolex within the lesion, which favors the diagnosis of NCC. So you should know judiciously where to apply this Fiesta, where all you need to complete the imaging. With this, doing one sequence will help the radiologist in a long way, right? So next is orbital imaging, which is very, very, very important. Now, two images are put here. This is a conventional imaging with a head coil, your orbital imaging with a head coil. And this is using the loop coil or the surface coil. Now, this is how you need to position within the surface coils. But as you all know, you can't keep the coil touching the skin directly. So place a tissue paper over the eyes, cover it, and then place the loop coils like this. You get high resolution images and you get high SNR. So close proximity to the eyes, the coil in close proximity to the eyes will strengthen the MR signals. Okay, localized sensitivity will ensure that the noise from outside the imaging area will be significantly reduced, and there won't be any wraparound artifacts even with a shorter FOV. And you all know when you use a volume coil, definitely the sensitivity will decrease with increasing distance from the coil, right? And there are orbits, you have several indications where they ask for, MRI orbits or optic neuritis. There can be several complaints. Particularly, you do a diffusion weighted images and calculate the ADC values and push to PACS. But say, for example, there is a patient with Graves' disease or thyroid eye disease. In such cases, don't forget to do a diffusion in the coronal plane. And wherever you see a diffusion restriction, calculate the ADC and push those images to PACS. Okay. In orbital imaging, you have a special condition called orbital varix. Now, what is orbital varix? A varix is it's a lesion, it's a vascular lesion. Okay, it's a venous malformation that occurs because of increased pressure and because of the intracranial. It can be because of an intracranial underlying AVM or a carotid cavernous fistula or a dural arteriovenous fistula. If the consultant request or the clinician's demand or they're suspecting an orbital varix, maybe a routine MR in the supine will not be sufficient. So you need to know, because it's a mixture of, when you say varix, look at the second image, it's a mixture of flow voids, and you will have to demonstrate that. So what you need to do is you need to demonstrate in the supine and in the prone position. So when you put, if you see here, this guy, this 59-year-old person, his right eye bulges on straining. So what you need to do is put the patient in supine, do an imaging, and put the patient in the prone position. The straining will demonstrate the orbital varix. So this is known as the Valsalva maneuver technique in orbital imaging, particularly to demonstrate a varix. Okay? Right. Next, we move on to a very important imaging, that is MR cochlea. Now with the cochlea implant taking leaps and bounds, there are many congenital babies with congenital hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss, working up for a cochlea implant. They need to give CT and MRI together, the details. So usually we do it as a package in our institution, and wherein the child will be sedated and we do an MRI cochlea and we do a CT cochlea together. The CT will depict multiple minute details of the osseous structures, whereas MRI will demonstrate the fluid-filled spaces and the vestibulocochlear nerve. So now this is a Fiesta sequence. Okay, this is a Fiesta sequence where you can go for thinner slices. It's a 3D Fiesta sequence done in the axial plane, where you will be able to appreciate the nerves very well, the cranial nerves very well. Okay, so you need to go for thinner sections, maybe about 0.5 to 0.7 millimeter thickness for optimal delineation of the nerves. And you need to do this heavily titulated sequences to demonstrate the fluid-filled spaces of the membranous labyrinth and the 8th cranial nerve. Okay, so this is the axial plane that you acquire. And don't forget to do a T2FS over the entire brain, because whatever said and done, the benefit of imaging should go to the patient. So a complete screening of the brain will be better always, even if the request is for MRI cochlea. Now, once you're done with this axial, you can post-process and send the VR images to PACS, where they can comment about the structures, about the cochlear turns and everything. So you need to do the post-processing and push to PACS. But what about oblique sagittal? Now, usually you do sagittals, but doing a 3D sequence, many of us might ask, I've done an axial 3D Fiesta. Now, why should I do a sagittal Fiesta too? Why should the direct acquisition be done? Fine. Now, sagittals, how do you plan? How you should plan perpendicular to the nerve roots on your axial images. Okay. Now, you can reformat the sagittals, but then direct acquisitions will provide better conspicity of the small cochlear structures, and it will show all the nerve bundles better in the IAC with the 8th nerve in the, I'll show you in the subsequent slide. You can see here, yes. So if you do a direct acquisition of the sagittal Fiesta, you can demonstrate the facial nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve, here the facial, the cochlea, and the vestibular nerve. Then the inferior and superior vestibular nerve. You can see the cochlea turned here. and you can see the cochlea partially unwinding. So these are the reformats that you do after you acquire a sagittal. Reformats can be done, but these images are from our institute, which have been acquired by direct sagittal acquisition. So it's okay. I mean, it all depends on the institution, but preferably direct acquisitions will be better. Better details, better conspicity of the abnormalities will be demonstrated, right? Right. Next, one more application of this Fiesta. You might have come through requisitions asking for an M. Fine, but then the most important will be your 3D acquisition, the Fiesta 3D sequence. Most important, as technologists, you need to transfer them to the workstation, do a curved reformat, go for the reformats and do the MEP, demonstrate the ducts over here, because they will ask for the MR xylogram to look for the ductal system and for the major salivary glands. So this study will be useful in picking up xylolithiasis, xylodinitis, and even some benign salivary gland disorders. Fine. So with the brain, I think I've covered very important ones where there's a modification of the technique that is required. And in spectroscopy, whenever you do a spectroscopy, just doing it randomly with an intermediate TE or with a longer TE is not enough. You need to have where to do a short TE, where to do a long TE, because you will not be able to appreciate all the metabolites within a one TE. So in short TE, you might be able to show the peaks like metabolites like glutamate, glutamine, alanine, and myoinositol. With a medium TE, the lactate and alanine doublets are inverted. When you go for long TE, like 288 milliseconds, the lipid lactate peaks will be well differentiated. When you're doing spectroscopy, technologists, please keep this in mind. You need to have control on the shimming. You need to do a global shimming. You need to do a localized shimming. You need to put saturation bands everywhere. Look for the water suppression. And when you're planning the multivoxel, you should include sections. Suppose there's a tumor, you need to include these sections of the tumor as well as the normal structures on the contralateral side. Okay, and place the saturation bands. Look at the water suppression value. If it is more than 95%, that is very, very important. And avoid including calcifications, the bony skull wall, hemorrhages, so that it does not contaminate the information from a spectroscopy, right?